morning, everyone. I'm delighted to see so many of you here on this first day of October. Hope you got in between the drops all right. I'm Joanne Bundy, and if you will silence your cell phones and turn on the teach coil, we'll get right into our class this morning. John McIntyre is a first-timer for our bucket courses, and our planning committee has a very strict rule that in order to invite someone to lecture at the bucket courses, someone on the planning committee must have heard them speak. And we've made an exception for John this morning. None of us have heard him speak. However, John is the father of Eric McIntyre, one of your very favorites. And we figured the tree doesn't grow very far from the fallen apple. The second reason is that we are dying to find out how Wilma Mankiller got her name. I couldn't resist. In addition to being Eric's father, John has credentials other than that, and I apologize for reading these to you, but he graduated from the University of Arkansas with a PhD in chemistry. He started his career working for the Atomic Energy Commission in Oak Ridge, Tennessee for 8 years. Then he went to Freeport, Texas, where he worked for Dow Chemical for 24 years. John taught chemistry at New Mexico Highlands University for 7 years. So he's been in front of a group before. I hope that you will enjoy this very much. We're dying to find out about Wilma Mankiller, who is the first female chief of the Cherokee Nation. This is John McIntyre lecturing today, Professor McIntyre Sr.
Not yet.
There should be a little red light come on.
Oh, there it is. Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay. You need, let us know when we can adjust the sound for it. I usually get introduced as Eric's father. And people know me as that. And I would like to say that Eric inherited all of his talents.
Yeah.
And I taught him everything he knows. But Christmas is coming along. If I told you that, I'm afraid Santa would just fly over the house and I couldn't see him. So I'm not going to make that claim. I'm going to talk about the lady here, Wilma Mankiller. She's Cherokee. And I hope by the end of the program that you will agree, Wilma was not only a role model for women, especially Native American women, but all women, and in fact, all of us, including the men. It's astounding what she did and what she accomplished in her life. I want to start, though, back with her ancestry. We're going to go back a long ways. This is American History 101 that you didn't get in high school, and probably college. Native Americans came here from Siberia area 18,000 years ago. Europeans have been here 500 years. So there's a little bit of history went on in between. And we want to review it real quick. At that period, there was a land bridge that formed here between Siberia and Alaska. The sea level had dropped 300 feet. So this was all land. There was some snow and stuff due to all of the ice and so forth accumulated on the Earth, Ice Age. They crossed here. There was probably back and forth for 5,000 years. This land bridge was open, and they traveled back and forth. They on the side of the mountains here, on both sides, down the coast, and the other side was called a corridor kind of thing where they could go back and forth. And they came through and they went all over the place. Humans have been exploring since they came out of Africa. More recently, went to the moon, example. About 14,000 years ago, there are recorded archaeological sites at the tip of South America in Chile. So these people have been here a really, really long time. Well, the snow started melting and so forth, and things went on, and they began to develop their cultures in different areas and so forth. In the next slide, you can see the, here are some things that I picked out just to mention a few. They developed a culture similar or sometimes superior to what was going on in Europe and the Middle East at certain times, especially the European in the Dark Age period and so forth. A couple of the famous places, the Inca were in the Andes in South America along the coast. The Maya were in Yucatan Peninsula. Aztec were in Mexico City. Chaco Canyon is in northwest New Mexico. Cahokia is a site across the river from St. Louis. And some of you may be familiar with that. They developed extensive agricultural systems. They hybridized a grass that we know they call maize, and we know as corn, which is growing all over the place here. There were at least 3 different varieties that were developed for the different regions and climates in the area. Desert area, rainy areas, hot, cold, different things. At least 3 different varieties of squash. They had many varieties of beans. They collected nuts and so forth. It's actually reported that they had agriculture 7,000 years ago when the agriculture started here. Think of the Middle East, okay, the Fertile Crescent, the Fertile Valley and so forth over there. They had developed extensive agricultural systems. Example, in the Gila River system runs across southern Arizona. They settled both sides of the river, and they had irrigation systems that expanded along the river for about 200 miles. So, what? They practiced contour farming in the mountains. They did farming on the edges of the mountain terraces like they do in China and so forth. Stone tools, mostly domesticated animals, examples, turkey, dogs, llama in South America, and also some birds. Example, the macaws were raised. They were eaten, they were raised in pens, and they used their feathers. They were good trade items and so forth. And they had extensive trade systems, which I'll mention a few in a minute. I'm going to go back real quick and cover some of the Mayan. These people, Susan and I visited Chichen Itza, which is in the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. They built pyramids, stone pyramids, in the city there that rivaled the pyramids in Egypt. The thing about irrigation, the Egyptians had irrigation, these guys had irrigation and so forth. Everything basically was made out of stone. They had highly developed agriculture, very large area, the whole peninsula area. They had trade throughout the area all the way to the Pacific Ocean, up into the United States area and down into South America. One thing that interests me, they had an astronomical observatory. They had a calendar that rivaled anything in Europe at the time. They could predict when there were eclipses, for example, and so forth. They had a symbolism written language, which is written on the walls all over the place there. And they had a base 10 number system. And Britain is very similar to the Roman numeral system. So they knew mathematics, they practiced medicine, they had extensive herbal medicine and so forth. They did conduct brain surgery using obsidian scalpels, which doctors have found out are superior to anything we can make out of metal, and they are being used sometimes to do surgery today. Another thing that was real interesting, they had sport arenas. Think of Greece, think of Rome. These were larger than a football field. They were sunken, they had stone walls all around them that were 10 or 15 feet high. In the center, on both sides, were two large stone rings. Had a hole about that big around in them. This, people sit around the top and watch the games. They had a ball game. The ball was about that big around, it was stone. And I think of rugby when I think of this, basically. You know, you throw the ball out there and you fight over it and you see who can get it through the hoop. They had big tournaments. This was major entertainment. And if you think now, Colosseum Rome, when they had the championships at the end of the year, the team that lost was beheaded. So, pretty good culture. Jump on down to Chaco Canyon here. This is a picture in Chaco Canyon. This is a kiva, which is a ceremonial area. These walls are probably 15 feet tall. They have seating around the edge, fireplaces and so forth. This is covered with the log roof. Can't see much in the background, but Chaco Canyon is 20, 25 miles long in northwest New Mexico. They built community houses along the canyon. They farmed it. There was a nice river running through and so forth. They built apartment complexes. They were in a semicircle. The southern wall across the area was perfectly aligned east and west, as accurate as any modern surveyor could do today. They built stone apartment complexes, 5 or 6 feet high, and these were very large. They were size of 2 or 3 of our city blocks or so. And there were a number of them along the canyon. One of the things that was amazing, they had an extensive trade in the surrounding area. They had stone paved roads, Appian Way, Rome. They were 20 feet wide and some of them extended for 50 miles. They went in every direction, and so that was the Chaco area that was covered. There weren't a lot of trees out here, so they cut trees in a forest 50 miles away and carried them in to make roofs for all of these structures and stuff. This kind of thing was going on. Okay, we're going to jump quickly to Cahokia. Now we're getting close to Wilma Mankiller's time, or area, not her time. Cahokia, as I said, is across the river from St. Louis, and it was quite an established area. There were 6 major areas of the Mississippian people at that time. They covered the whole, from North to South America, from north to south to north, United States, the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, spread the Appalachian Mountains over across into the Midwest area. And they were kind of split it up into 6 major regions. The Cahokia was the center of one. One of the things that they had there, they built a large city. They had a mound that was 100 feet high, earthen dam, the largest earthen structure in North America until 100 years or so ago. The top of it was flat, 16 acres. There was a huge building on top of it. In the area, there were over 100 mounds built of various sizes and so forth. It was surrounded by a palisade, a 200-acre area of logs that stood up for protection. The elite lived inside, and the people lived in farms and all the way around and supplied goods. The Cahokia area, metropolitan area, ran for 25 miles north and south along the Mississippi River on the east side. It ran for 11 miles from the Mississippi River east. This is half the area of Missouri County. They had a population of 16,000 people. Missouri County has 18,700 back in 2012. So basically the population density of this community was double what's Missouri County.
Poweshiek County.
Poweshiek County. I'm sorry, I'm back in Texas. We, the main thing was agriculture, corn, beans, and squash, and so forth. So quite a sophisticated society. Next slide. We're moving on now. Here's a map of the area. The Mississippians basically covered this area here, of which the Cherokee are a portion that lived in this area. There was one of these sections here, here, over here, and all the way over into East Texas. Around this area, another one, and another one. Those were the 6 different areas. Yeah, this is the Mississippian culture. This was the whole eastern United States, from the Mississippi over. Okay, next slide. Okay, things are going real good for these people, and then this guy named Columbus came along. And he called the Native Americans Indians, which is a misnomer because he wasn't in India. He made a mistake. The Spanish came in, basically through Mexico. They did the Incas and Mayans and Aztec and all of that, and into the Southwest. Coronado came across Southwest area. Coronado de Soto, which this is a mural that was painted based on the documentation from his exploration event. In 1539, he landed in Florida. He was Spanish. The conquistadors with some priests marched across the southeast, and to the Mississippi. He actually died of a fever by the time they got to the Mississippi. The people who survived continued along the Gulf Coast and eventually ran into some Spanish people down in Mexico. There was only a few who made it, but they did have the documentation. This is based on the documentation. One of the cities that he visited from the Mississippi area was Cofichiqui. That's my pronunciation, city, which was populated from 1400 to 1600 AD, mainly heavily populated. And they named it Little Egypt because of the culture and so forth. Here you see pictures of these huge house complexes. Here's a pyramid. River back here. They were thatched roofs. I think that's the priest or so back here. Anyway, he's in the middle there, DeSoto, and the Indians are surrounding him. They communicate, and the priests are documenting all of these things and so forth. In 1583, Captain Juan Duo entered the area on another Spanish expedition and crossed the area and redocumented and said, yeah, DeSoto was right. He got it all right. The next European that entered the area was a guy named Cherokee. He was French. You know, the French had moved into the Canada area, and they came over through Canada and down the Mississippi. And Louisiana Purchase, we bought that from the French. So they basically controlled that area of the country. And in 1699, he brought back reports and contacting the Cherokee people and so forth. And then in the, basically in the early 1700s, English settlers, colonists, started crossing the mountains over into the central area here. The southeast was divided into a number of, called 5 civilized tribes, because we just saw pictures of how some of their civilization and some of the things they did. We have the Cherokee, the Cherokee Nation, Seminole, there's Chickasaw, and Choctaw, yeah. These all lived in that southeast area from the Appalachians basically to the Mississippi River.
Why were they called civilized?
Because when the people came in and saw their culture and how they lived, these were farms. These people lived in houses. They were farmers. They were as civilized as the colonists that were there and so forth. So they were considered as civilized tribe.
They weren't nomad.
No, these settled. They were,
Settlers.
yeah, these people had big communities, you know, they had cities and stuff and things. Okay, next slide here. This is the area that the Cherokee were in. Seminole down here, Choctaw down here, and then the Chickasaw and Muskogeans over in this area. You can see it's a fairly large area. Kentucky down to Georgia, across Tennessee, the Carolinas and so forth. The settlers came in from up here, Virginia made some contact, from the Carolinas and Georgia. And the next slide will show, here are some trading areas. One of the things they did is come into the area and trade with the Native Americans. They brought tools and all kinds of things and so forth. And in exchange for like animal skins and all kinds of things that the Indians traded back to them. And he said, I gotta change pages. One of these early settlers, Cornelius Daugherty, came across from Virginia, and he was a trader, and he began an exchange going back and forth. He eventually married a Cherokee woman. Now, the Cherokee Nation is matrilineal. Women own everything. They own the house, they own the gardens, they ran the gardens, they ran the house, they took care of the children and everything. The men hunted, warriors, and did various things and so forth. They had a Cherokee council, which was headed by a chief. This was mostly men. The men were, you know, head of the government, but the women did all the work and owned everything. So that was kind of their culture. There were cases of women documented as being on the Cherokee Council. And there were cases that also Some of them actually participated in hunts and warfare, but not in majority, not. Following him, Eleason Wiggins and Ledoc Grant came into the area. Same thing as Daugherty. They interacted and they ended up marrying Cherokee women and living on their farms and so forth. So white culture was coming in. It was also coming in from the other areas for Georgia and so forth. And this made a major impact. This was absorbed by the Cherokee tremendously. Here's a picture, for example. This is a farm. This is an actual farm. It still exists. They maintained it and kept it up. They have a barn, they have a log house, wooden shingles, a stone chimney and so forth. The fence wasn't there at that time. It was a major farm. They had horses, cows, horses and pigs and chickens and so forth. They had stone tools, metal tools, metal utensils and so forth. They learned English. They developed schools. They actually wrote a constitution based on the U.S. Constitution. They had a Supreme Court. The head of the government, of course, was the tribal leader councils. These basically were colonial people. They adopted all of these ways. I'm going to interject a little story here. One of the stories, they have a creation story that I think is real interesting. God, a God, created the earth. The earth was covered with water. There wasn't any land. So she had some beetles dive down to the bottom and collect mud and bring it up and build up the earth. Now, so then she had to create the sun because she had to produce heat and she needed light. And that dried up the earth so she could bring in animals and birds and fish and bugs and all kinds, everything for the earth. And the very last that she created was human beings. And she put human beings in charge of the earth. They were responsible for what happened in the earth. Sound kind of like something in the Bible, like Genesis?
Yeah.
Very, very similar. She also told them if they didn't take care of the earth and didn't do their responsibility and take care of each other and so forth, they would be punished. Well, they took over all these white men ways. And we'll find that they got pretty severely punished for the rest of their time. And they blame it on going away from the traditional ways. These two houses were constructed, they're reconstructed based on real houses. And I think they're in Cates Cove in the Great Smoky Mountains area. You can visit those. Next slide. Here we have gold discovered, the curse on the Indians, the Black Hills, California gold rush, Alaskan gold rush, all the gold rushes, Colorado and so forth. The whites came in, they started mining. This was actually, I don't know this guy's name, but he was the original, he was the first founder, started the gold rush. And this was in northern Georgia. Well, people just flocked in, came in all over the area. And this encroachment in the eastern part of the nation made a lot of the Cherokee unhappy. They finally got a large group together and they took all of their goods, all of their belongings and everything. They put them on boats and they floated down the Tennessee River to the Mississippi, over to the Arkansas River, and then they journeyed up the Arkansas River and they populated the Arkansas River basin from the Mississippi to the Ozarks and Oklahoma line. They built extensive farming. It's great farmland. They had extensive farming. They were running perfect. It was really great experience. These people were considered the old settlers. They moved willingly. This guy, kind of an interesting sequoia, he came with the old settlers into the area, and he lived somewhere around where Little Rock is. He said, oh, the English, the white people have bird tracks on leaves, writing on paper, and we need that. So he developed an alphabet based on the Cherokee language, and he actually obtained a printing press and started printing a newspaper. And he printed books in Cherokee for the school children and so forth. So he established printing. This continued throughout, and eventually there was the newspapers in the whole area, Indian Territory, so were printed in English and Cherokee. Yes?
Do you know about what year that would be?
It was somewhere like 1820s or so. The old settlers moved in 1811, and it was about halfway between then and 1830s. I'm not perfectly sure. The next slide. Know who this guy is? Okay. Well, in the Cherokee mind, this guy is to them what Hitler was to the Jews. And he basically did the same thing to a big extent. Andrew Jackson, he became kind of famous or started his career in the War of 1812. He brought a huge army group down through the area, and the British had New Orleans and the southern Mississippi River. They controlled that in the trade, so they controlled the area. And the Americans wanted to drive, or the U.S. wanted to drive them out of America so they could claim that area in that section. So we have the War of 1812. Jackson took troops through this area, and at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, which I don't recall exactly where it was, on his way to New Orleans, he came across a large contingent of British troops. They had a major battle. In his group, he had 500 Cherokee warriors and a number of warriors from some of the other tribes. They battled. They actually beat the British, but there's major speculation that if the Indians weren't there, he would have been defeated readily. He would have been captured or killed. Wouldn't have had a battle of New Orleans. And so what would happen, what would we do in the United States if it weren't for that? We're still fighting, we're still going to fight Britain. They still own all of that part. So he changed the history. They changed the history, basically. Well, he became president based on his war, defeating New Orleans, and the hero of New Orleans and so forth. And he then repaid the Cherokee. He came along and had a law made, some of these bills over here, of the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Well, the U.S. was expanding. They needed land. So we're going to take over. We want to open up the land to the Mississippi River. And we can't do this with all these Indian tribes down there. So the law was passed that they would round up and move all of these Indians to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. Well, the Cherokee, these were civilized people. They had lawyers, they had laws, they knew things. They had gone back and forth to Washington, they knew how things went. They brought a case against the government, and it went through the various government courts, went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, yes, you cannot remove these people. You have a binding treaty signed by Congress. It is against federal law. They cannot be removed. And it's reported that Jackson responded by saying, you made the rule, you enforce it. And he proceeded to have the removal take place. This set a precedence for all future Indian removal that the U.S. did. Moving all the people to reservations, gathering them up for the whole country for the rest of history. So this is where that came from. So now you can understand why they kind of hated Jackson. This comes to something called the Trail of Tears, and this will stop at the end of this slide. The Army sent troops in. They marched up to the homesteads. The soldiers came in. Oh, didn't mention, the Cherokee back a long time ago in the 1700s had black slaves. That was another thing incorporated. And in 1735, one of the black slaves came in off the boat, had smallpox, and it started an epidemic, and half the population died because of that. So, you know, they're totally Americanized. The troops came marching in, they came up to your house, they told you to gather all the goods that you can carry, whatever you can carry and so forth, and follow us. They had a couple of hours to do this. If not, you were forced or shot. So they rounded all of these people up. They brought them down to a couple of camps here in this area, which I call concentration camps. This was started in the spring of 1834. And by the end of the summer, they had them all rounded up. A portion of them, or about half, were put on boats and transported along the Tennessee River over through the Arkansas and stuff to the reservation in Indian Territory in northeast Oklahoma. The other portion were marched on foot. This picture depicts that. You take whatever you can carry, you're going to walk through the fall, over here, you get here in early winter. You're in a forested mountain area. They promised them housing and food and shelter and all of this stuff, which really didn't much happen. Of the 17,000 people that were taken here and marched over here, 4,000 died. Starvation, exposure, diseases, and so forth. And so now we're in Indian Territory. This is where Wilma comes in. And we'll do that after the break.
Thank you for taking your seats. Now first of all, I want to thank Eric's mom for being our technician today. It helps a lot, doesn't it, John? And now we get into Wilma Mankiller and Professor McIntyre Sr.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge Susan. She did all the visual arts for presentation and her one thing I thought I'd mention, I've been fascinated by Native Americans since I was a small child. when I was 6 years old, we lived on the side edge of town at a dead-end street that ended into a large farm field, 20 acres or so. The guy grew various crops and so forth, and sold to the markets. Every time he plowed or every time it rained, I was out walking his field looking for Indian artifacts. So I started back then, and I've been fascinated ever since. My most recent program interest, on Friday afternoons, you'll find me and a small group of people over at Grinnell Hall with Professor Whitaker making stone tools. And this is just kind of a hobby. And I brought one I'll pass around just to show you some of the things. This is a spear point that I made. This is the kind of things we do. We make all different kinds. And he takes his classes. An example, we went out to our farm and he took stone axes and cut down some trees and branches and stuff and made little things and so forth with his students. So it's fun and interesting. Back to the program here. One thing I didn't mention, some of the Cherokee did not get rounded up. They escaped and went into the Smoky Mountain area, and they lived there. Eventually, over a much later period, they acquired land, they purchased it, they bought all of this land, and they now have the Eastern Cherokee Band, and headquarters is Cherokee, North Carolina, which is on the edge, eastern edge of the Smoky Mountain National Park. Okay, Jackson started it, and it continued forever. All these people still were migrating, and there was this rich farmland in the central area, north to south, in Oklahoma, and it was really nice farmland. And the settlers had moved in through Kansas and places, and they're looking over there and saying, this sure would be a good place. So, whoops, there. We have what's called the General Allotment Act of 1887. We're going to civilize these Indians. They need to live like the white men. The white farmers and people lived on a homestead area. And so, it's also called the Dawes Act from Senator Dawes. And the initial part was you get a census of all the Cherokee, all the people. And some people didn't want to get census. Being an Indian's kind of a bad connotation sometimes. So they didn't sign up. They didn't sign up everybody. But those that they signed up, and this is an important document with this, they were allotted a homestead acreage. A family got 160 acres. An individual, one in a family, got 60 acres for a farm. Of course, they gave them the land that was in the mountains. And the land out around Tulsa, Oklahoma City area, all of that area, the good farmland, about 20%, the Indians had about 25% of their reservation. The rest of it, the government took away, and we had the Indian land sale, or the Oklahoma land rush, from which the term Sooner came, because some people crossed the border the day before and started establishing things. You ran in, you staked off your area, and then you paid the government. Well, who got the money? You can guess. It should have gone to the Indians. It is still in the law courts and still being protested. The federal government owes the Indians billions of dollars, and accounts where they collected money and did not turn it over to them. Anyway, that's the business. Okay, so this was the big thing. And we got all of these troubles and so forth. Another thing, and encroachment and taking over. The next slide, coming along, we have the next act that comes along. Urbanization Relocation Act. We need to civilize these people. They've been living in the mountains. They're uncivilized. They don't know how to live like us white folks. The yellow are various reservations, and again, they rounded up all of these people. About half the people living on the reservations. They put them on trains, and they sent them out to California. And they moved them into cities because they needed to be Americanized. Now, in the cities, they had to live in suburban areas. They were basically slums. They had to do jobs, white man jobs, work in the community. They had to, you had to wear white man's clothes. You could only speak English and so forth and so on. And so, here they are, major culture shock. Well, this has brought us into Wilma's time. Wilma's grandfather, John, actually took land called Mankiller Flats in Oklahoma from the Trail of Tears. And her father, Charlie, born in 1915, then, lived on that land grant. And eventually, he was sent to an Indian school. I don't know if you know about Indian boarding schools, but real quick. They took the kids, they needed to civilize them. They took 6-year-old kids. They came to your house, they knocked on the door, the social service people collected your kids over 6 years old, took them to these boarding schools. They lived there for 12 years. They were educated in the white way. First thing they did is cut their hair off. This was terrible. You could only speak English. If you spoke your native language, you were beat with a rod. You had to wear white man's clothes and shoes, so forth, and a hat, and whatever. The students, besides the school, they ran the gardens. They raised their own food. They cleaned the place. They did the laundry. They did the cooking and everything. There was just supervisor over it. They were walking around with sticks and beat you if you didn't do your job and so forth. Well, Charlie, after he got out, had not been brainwashed. He was full-blood Cherokee. He came home and he lived back and went back to his culture. It didn't work on him. Right after school, he came back and started living on the fence. He married Clara Irene Sitten, and she was Dutch-Irish, white woman who came from a farm in the area. She totally adopted Cherokee ways. They moved and lived on their farm, and they lived in the Cherokee tradition and so forth, and she learned and spoke Cherokee and so forth. They had 11 children, of which Wilma was one of them. She was the 6th of the 11. She was born on September the 15th, 1945. When she was 10 years old, 1955, this Relocation Act came in. So pack up your stuff, get on a train, go to San Francisco and the suburb areas. And was raised. She was educated there in the school system. It was a major problem, but she had this desire to help her people. And she did volunteer projects and so forth. She helped with preschool, adult education, Indian rights things and so forth. And getting into the 60s, she got out of college and she's a student. She got out of high school. Now she's a young lady and she's living in San Francisco in the 60s, and you can she jumped right in. She had a great time. That was basically her startup thing. In '63, while she was in college, she married Hector Hugo Ollier. And he was a Honduran student, so he was Spanish. This is her over here on your right, holding up her hand. She was, I think, 23 years old or so at that time. She was active in everything, in volunteering. And so she was studying sociology in San Francisco College. They had two daughters. One, Felicia, was born in 1964, and Gina was born in 1966. Their last names are Olia, her father's name. So. Well, one of the events, no, back up. Okay, the picture of her at Alcatraz, one of the things that she did, a group of students got together, and Alcatraz prison was closed, and it was abandoned. And there's a federal law that public land that was taken from groups by eminent domain, if the government abandons it and leaves, it reverts back to the original owners. This is a very active thing going on in New Mexico nowadays with land grant people. Old roads, railroad right-of-ways, areas, so forth. The government abandons them, and they're in there with their lawyers reclaiming that land for their land grant area. Well, they use that law to claim Alcatraz belonged to the Indians, which they took it from the Native Americans. And that went on for quite a few months and so forth. The federal government got fed up, and we're not, all the protests they had, they knew how to handle that. And they sent some troops in, and they rounded them all up and hauled them off. So they didn't win that battle. And then they eventually made into the national park systems. You can go visit Alcatraz. This is Wilma. These are her two daughters. And due to all this activity, Hector, who was Spanish, believed that women belong in the home. And they didn't have any business going out and running around. She should be home, be seen, not heard. Take care of the house, take care of the kids, and so forth. Well, eventually this erupted in a divorce situation in 1977. And so Wilma took her two daughters and they went back to Oklahoma. And they built a house and lived on Mankiller Flats.
Where was that in Oklahoma? Do you know?
Do you know where Tahlequah is?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of southwest, a few miles from there. And she lived there the rest of her life. They lived in a house. In fact, she lived in the house. It had all wood burning stove. They cut wood and so forth and so on until the day she died. So she didn't build a mansion and all that kind of stuff. Okay, we're moving on now. Let me see. She got real active in the Cherokee community and working for the government. She was started all kinds of projects, writing grants, getting money and so forth. One of the things that she did though, and Let me catch up to where I'm. In 1979, she started attending graduate school majoring in sociology at the University of Arkansas, which is in Fayetteville. This is across through the mountains, about an hour's drive from Tahlequah, which is the capital of the Cherokee Nation. And later towards the end of that semester in the fall, she was traveling home on Highway 67, which Susan and I have traveled numerous times when I was going to school there because our relatives lived in Texas and we'd always go home and drive that road. It's a windy mountain road, 2-lane, no shoulders. And she's driving along, and this young lady, about 20 years old, coming from the west, decides that she's in a hurry, and she passes a truck on a curve and runs into Wilma head-on. She died instantly. They really didn't expect Wilma to live at first, but she did survive. She had crushed ribs, 2 broken legs, broken arm, and contusions and so forth, and a head injury. After 17 surgeries and a long recuperation period, she was back working again, just as fast as much as she could. That was quite a thing. Then later, November 1981, which a couple of years later, she was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis. I don't know how well I said it, which is a neuromuscular disease. And they removed her thymus, and she was on a drug for that for the rest of her life. But that didn't stop her, because in that period, in late 1981, she had started working on a project called the Bell Community Project for the tribe. This was a major project. The Bell community was a small town in the mountains, run-down houses, no running water, none of these things and so forth. So she acquired grants and donations from people to buy all the supplies needed to perform this task. And the labor was provided by the members of the community. They restored some old dilapidated housing, they built some new housing, and worked on some roads and that kind of thing. But the major thing was a pipeline. This is the pipeline being put in. They dug the ditches and laid a 16-mile water pipeline and brought running water to the community, all by themselves. These people didn't have the government come do it for them. They did it themselves. This is Charlie Mankiller, who became a very good friend of hers, and we'll talk about him later. But he was working on the project. He was kind of the head of the engineering or the labor workforce and so forth in the project. So she continues to do things. This impressed people greatly in the Cherokee government and so forth. So in 1983, 1983, Chief Ross Simmer, who had been chief for 12 years, the past 12 years, very, very popular, asked her to run with him on his re-election as deputy chief of Cherokee. So now she's entering politics. She ran with him because he was popular. She got voted. She was a woman. There was a big concern, the woman taking a job like that and being elected and so forth. Major problems, a lot of people against it. And in 1885, then, he got appointed the head of the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, he left. She became chief. And people, you know, the world's going to hell. You can imagine. A woman chief. And here's a picture of her being sworn in and so forth. And some of the projects that she was leading and so on. During this period, she started major advances in the, with the people and so forth, and in culture and things. Later on, next slide, she married Charlie Soap. They got married, and I've got that, I have to look. 1986, 1986, okay, I'm getting, he's full-blood Cherokee, and they lived on Mankiller Flats. He moved in and lived with her. Remember, women on the property. She's chief now. She was re-elected the second time in 1991. And, well, and again in the second time, 1991, she got 83% of the vote. So people were all in, this woman's okay. She did right. One other thing, in 1990, she started having kidney failure. And her brother donated a kidney. And she's chief, she's running things. And he's, does that. She was diagnosed with breast cancer and lymphoma. She did drug treatment and is in remission from that. So all of these things were happening to her physically, and she was running things. While she was chief, some of the things that she did, she brought a tremendous new businesses into the Cherokee Nation area. They had labor. She brought businesses in for jobs. They completed $20 million in construction projects for the area, brought in jobs with government and other areas. A $8 million Job Corps training center was built there and managed and run by the Cherokee. Just tons of things. The list goes on and on and on, her accomplishments and so forth. In 1995, she was up for re-election again, and she turned it down. She said, my health is such that I cannot do good in the office. But she continued to work. She was there all the time. She was, getting money and running projects and everything on her own outside, but not officially chief of the nation. Let me see. Getting down to the end here. The next slide, we see her. These are some quotes she's kind of famous for. I want to be remembered as a person who helped us restore our faith in ourselves. Individually and collectively, Cherokee people possess an extraordinary ability to face down adversity and continue moving forward. And I think from the history that you've seen, this states it pretty much. All of the things that they went through, and they're still here, and they're doing it. One of the things that she accomplished while she was chief is to increase the roll membership in the Cherokee Nation. When she took over, the membership was about 55,000 people. And she felt that she needed to bring Cherokee in and become part of the Cherokee community. She did this in a number of ways. One of the ways in which she did it was to have communities all over go out and look for people. She started an office that went back to the Dawes Roll, that census that they took a long time ago, and started searching for people. And that were, actually could trace their ancestry back to the Dawes Rolls. She ended up increasing from 55,000 to 156,000. Cherokee is the second largest nation, Indian nation in the United States, next to the Navajo. This became important. A little personal thing I'm going to run through real quick. I attended a talk at the University of Houston, led by a lady who was Cherokee. There's a small Cherokee community in Houston area, and she gave this presentation, and it was part of the Mankiller thing to bring in membership and so forth. And at the end, they had some food and drinks and so forth. We're standing around, and she's talking to everybody, and I made a comment that I was, my father always told me I was part of Indian. And she said, oh, well, we should check you out. And I said, but I was adopted, there's no records. Well, she said, are you a Texan? I said, yeah. Are you over 50 years old? I said, yeah. And she said, that you can file and get your adoption records open and so forth. And I thought about it for a while and kicked this around and so forth. Finally contacted a lawyer, filled out the documents and so forth. Sent them in, and a long, long time later, I finally got a response back. The lawyer called me in. I was at work that day. She called me and said, I've got the papers, your papers here. And so I took off early and went by to them. And I walked in, and she sat behind her desk, and she says, hello, Floyd. And I said, my name's John McIntyre. She said, no, your name was Floyd Romine. So she had looked at the paper. Anyway, I got them. Long story short, over the years, we did genealogy and we did all kinds of study. Thanks for the help of Susan. And finally, found out who my mother and so and all of my relatives, a lot of my relatives. And in 2003, in August, I actually met my family and my mother and all my brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins and children and all of that stuff. And we managed to see each other and exchange letters and so forth. And she died the next June 2004. So Wilma Mankiller was a personal hero of mine because she made that happen. I would never have known that if it wasn't for her and her policy. Okay. We're gonna, next slide. These are some of the recognitions that she got. She's known worldwide. She was recognized for all the stuff. Women of the Year, Ms. Magazine, Oklahoma Hall of Fame, all kinds of Hall of Fames and so forth, AEW, International Women's Hall of Fame. She got 2 Presidential Medals of Honor from Clinton and from Obama. Just a huge list of things. She wrote 6 books. This was one of her first books. It's an autobiography, Mankiller, a Chief and Her People. I don't know for sure if they got it in the library or not, but it tells all of her, the history of Cherokee and all of her family and all of the things in detail that she went through and so forth. Very interesting book. She got 18 honorary doctorate degrees from various universities, such as Yale, Dartmouth, and Smith College. And as I said in the beginning, she was a role model, not only for women, not only for the Cherokee, but for all of us. You think of all the things she went through, her health, and all of these things that the Indians went through, and she came out and became famous and so forth. We're going to end with a short little video that's about her. And this will be the ending of the talk.
Move the lights down a little bit more.
Might add here that she died in September of 2010, recently at her home. She died of pancreatic cancer. I'll stay here and later ask for you. Yes?
You didn't answer Joanna's question. How did you get the name Mankiller?
Oh,
When and
I'm
when?
sorry. Mankiller is actually a title. It was given when they were in Tennessee, way back when, her great-great-great-grandfather. And it's a title similar to our military titles, major, captain, or colonel or something. So he was apparently somebody back then. And I do have, I do have the name in Cherokee. I'm not sure where it is. It ends up in Dahi. Oh, well. I can't find it right away. Yeah.
Did you find out that you have any Cherokee blood?
They could not trace it to the, I attended 2 conferences up there in Tahlequah at Northeastern New Mexico University. She asked if I had it Cherokee blood, and I submitted the papers. While I was at those conferences, I met her. Met her one day, she was just walking around and greeting people and so forth. And then I attended a banquet one night, which she was a speaker, and she stopped and talked to her. She greeted people coming in and talking and so forth. Amazing person, yeah.
How did the government get around the Supreme Court's decision that the Cherokee could not be evicted from their lands?
Well, you know, presidents do stuff. They don't get government to support them. And that's what Jackson said. You made the decision, you enforced it, and he proceeded to do what he wanted to do.
John, you mentioned the matrilineal character of the Cherokee Nation early on. Did that continue after the Trail of Tears in Oklahoma, and would that have helped to
Not
to position?
really. Eventually, it's debatable. The women still have a lot of influence and so forth, but only men could own property at that time, you know, in the government policies and so forth. So legally, the men own the property and things. He asked about the matrilineal, if it continued through. Okay. One more.
11 children. Do you know anything about the other 10?
No. Only thing I know, her brother gave her a kidney. She asked about the other children. Let's ask you.
I just wondered if the eastern and the western Cherokees are now united.
Yeah. And, you know, they're all part of the Cherokee Nation. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Ron, we'd like to thank you for an outstanding job in portraying the life of someone who made a difference. And you've really done the job on that, and someone we could probably all afford to emulate in some way, shape, or form. And in a token for this, we'll present you with this bucket of flowers. Thank you very much. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you very much, John McIntyre. Next week will be the 7th class of our 9-class.
No,
No?
5th.
5th or 7th.
5th of 7.
Oh, I'm sorry, the 5th out of the 7. Thank you. I was thinking the whole of 7 classes, and next week will be our 5th. And it will be a very interesting topic on Chaucer, soldier, civil servant, and poet in the late 14th century, which will be presented by Elizabeth Dobbs, who is Professor Emerita of English at Grinnell College. So turn your cell phone back on, stay between the drops this afternoon, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you.